All right, everybody. Been a great day of game dev, and now we get to see what the impact of those games are on Georgia itself. So it's amazing how much the game industry has grown in the state since I've been involved with it. And now we can actually have enough effect that we have an annual economic impact report. So Dr. J. O'Toole has been handling that for a number of years. And this year, we're very honored to have Peter Stathopoulos give us an overview on what that impact means, kind of a look at the credits and what all this actually does, what all these numbers that we put together with Jay, what those actually mean. So Dr. O'Toole, if you'll take it away.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's a joy to be here at Siege again this year, albeit virtually for me one more time. Hopefully, I'll be there in the future. But I'm excited to share this year's numbers from our annual survey and economic contributions report. As Andrew alluded to, it really has been another great year for the video game industry, and it's been growing over some time now. So let's just go straight into the numbers a little bit. We saw a slight increase in the terms of the total number of studios operating again this year. We're up to 141 as a part of our annual census that the GDDA puts together. And gross revenues were up this year as well, up to 577 million estimated in terms of the gross revenue across the state. Employment actually stayed pretty steady over the course of this year, which is, I suppose, given the pandemic, a good sign. This is a good outcome. Probably most meaningfully about the employment is the average salaries went up this year. We reached a record high in terms of the average salary across the game industry. And I think this reflects the broader economy as well in terms of even though we've been living in a pandemic, it is still very difficult to source highly skilled labor. The labor market is a good market for professionals in the video game industry, and it still can be very difficult to find the right people. From the economic impact side of the equation, in terms of the statewide impact, it's really important to note, specifically in this particular contributions analysis, that the Bureau of Economic Analysis revised the recommendations from prior years in terms of the effect that the industry and all industries actually have on state economies. And this is largely due to the pandemic. The amount of respending that likely occurred in the state based upon the economic activity within the industry is lower than usual. And typical models, the multipliers that are used and recommended by the Bureau are inappropriate during these kind of exogenous shocks, these situations where they're just unprecedented and we really don't fully appreciate the impact. So the Bureau recommended revised downward numbers for those that we incorporated into this year's analysis, which is why we look at the total value add and specifically even the total impact, economic impact, which accounts for the respending of money that is generated through the industry. So if you think about it as employees at game studios and game companies across the state earn money, they go back into the economy and respend that. Well, during a pandemic, as all of you have been living and I've been living, that has not been the same as it was in years past. In certain areas of our lives, we're probably spending a little bit more money. Part of the reason why we continue to see great revenue growth in the game industry. But in other parts of the economy, we don't see that same kind of spending. A little bit more conservative given their uncertainty. And so the total impact within the state this year was estimated, or in 2020, is estimated about $770 million. Still a sizable impact on the state, but slightly less than, if for those of you who've been following these reports from year to year, slightly less than previous years. But again, as is entirely due to the downward advice from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So that's a little bit about the state. I think everything continues to show great progress. Most analysts, if you look at the nationally and internationally, game industry is doing quite well with robust estimates for moving forward. The expectation in 2021 would be back to normal-ish, I guess you could say. I don't think we're going to be quite back to normal-ish for another year or two, but for the game industry, things are looking very good. I'm going to turn it over to Peter now. Peter, for you to share a few words.
Hey, thank you. So I wanted to give some context of how those numbers fit into the overall picture of Georgia's budget. So for fiscal year 2022, Georgia's overall budget minus any federal contributions is $27.3 billion. So, a 770 million economic impact is, pretty material for a state that has an overall budget of 27.3 billion. Now, that budget is still not quite back to where we would have been, but for the pandemic, there were significant cuts as a result of the pandemic to our last fiscal budget, and we're still catching up. Public education is still down by around 141 million. Higher education is down by around the same amount in terms of spending. But the good news is collections are up. Collections for September, which was the last state month I saw, were robust, with collections being up 30% over September last year, with that comprising a 50% increase in corporate income tax revenues, 13% increase in individual income tax revenues, and 18% increase in sales tax revenues. The other thing to keep in mind is, so Georgia has a digital gaming credit, which is great because it includes above the line expenditures, capped at 12.5 million. And so for the relatively huge contribution that the industry is making to Georgia's giving away a relatively small number, 12.5 million a year to achieve almost an $800 million economic benefit. So I know Andrew's been busy trying to get the legislature to increase that cap, but once again, it's fairly stark. Let's compare that to some other industries. For instance, the film industry has approximately a $4 billion economic impact or direct spend in Georgia, but gives away conversely about $1 billion of that back in revenues. So, going back to the credit, I do think that has been a significant driver of this program since 2005. I just have to point out it's a 30% credit if you include a logo. There are other options that you can do besides including the logo at various points in the credits of the game. There's also an alternative promotional menu that you can negotiate with the Department of Economic Development. It includes pretty much most costs, and it's dependable, been around every year, and no sunset date. So I think those are all strong factors for increasing confidence in the long-term staying power of Georgia in this market. And with that, I thought I'd open it up to questions from Andrew or anybody else.
Yeah, great input. Thank you both very much for that look at it. One of the questions we often get is that this is a rapidly growing industry, and Georgia's had a few rapidly growing industries. You talk about film, cyber, security, fintech. Film and games get distributed around the state. Fintech and cyber seem to be concentrated in Atlanta and Augusta. What other ways can we try to generate more of these rapid growth industries around the state? We often think of the having the good workforce for it. What other things can a locale do when they're trying to bring in these sort of industries?
Well, I'll just... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in general, economic developers tend to make sure you have an educated workforce in place. Low costs are the key, right? If you can set up a company here and get an educated workforce and have costs significantly lower than other regions of the country, say, for instance, the Pacific Northwest or the Northeastern U.S., that's a significant factor. And then when you throw on top of it a state that is already very friendly to business. So, Georgia's been ranked #1 state to do business for 7 years running. The government here is very much a partner in helping to grow businesses. That's helpful to have that track record. And finally, there's direct incentives like the digital entertainment and film incentive.
Things I would add to that, Andrew. which, Peter talked about briefly in terms of education. Obviously, as an educator, having a strong educational network and framework from which you can train and prepare employees that can rise quickly through a game company's organizational chart is really important, because we have, as we know in the state, we have a lot of young, eager, excited individuals that want to be a part of the industry, but finding that mid-level range takes time, and it takes time to develop, and having educational partners to work with you on that is important. The other thing is that, I just completed a study for small business development centers in Virginia. And one of the things that, in talking to small business owners, which a lot of game studios would qualify in that kind of space, is having ample opportunities for networking and mentoring, having individuals within this industry who are willing to work with those small game studios, work with those leadership of the small game studios, and helping them understand the landscape and how they can continue to grow their own businesses. So rather than thinking about it in a competitive environment of studios, playing against each other, they're really working in a cooperative space here, I think, in Georgia. And we've seen that in the past, but the more that can be done, certainly what I've heard in other studies of small businesses is that's a really needed and critical component to the ability to continue to grow that ecosystem.
Great input. And Peter, if you would, the industry has grown to the point where it needs the assistance of other more traditional industries, obviously networking, technology, lawyers, but now also the larger accountants, financial advisors, and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit more about your firm?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a partner with a firm called Bennett Thrasher. It's a full services accounting firm, and we have a specialization in entertainment, including digital entertainment, film, and television. And we help companies from the startup all the way to very large companies in terms of strategies, obviously tax advisory services, including locating the optimum mix of economic development incentives, whether those are R&D, digital gaming, or otherwise.
All right. Thank you both very much. We appreciate it. Now we're going to get you back in a conversation on finishing those games so you can qualify for the tax credits too. Liam will have a presentation on getting your team to AMP. Peter, Jay, thank you both very much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.